Hey guys, welcome back. Patrick here. Today we're going to be taking a look at some pretty cool stuff. We're going to be looking at an actual workflow going from Blender to creating a two-dimensional sprite sheet. And after we create said two-dimensional sprite sheet, we're going to be bringing it into THREE.js as a particle. And this is going to be kind of our hello world of particles. The main thing we're going to be illustrating here is how you can use Blender to create a three-dimensional sprite sheet and bring that into THREE.js. We'll get into more complicated stuff with particles a little bit later. But without further ado, I'm going to demo kind of one little concept behind this as per the creation of a two-dimensional sprite. Now, what this sprite sheet essentially is, a sprite is an object within THREE.js. It used to not be the case. This has changed a little bit. So if you're looking at some older tutorials that are on the web, things are treated a little bit differently. But now what we're looking at is an object where you can apply a texture to it. The sprite itself is always basically facing the camera, and it can be scaled in and out. And as you can see, essentially what this is a simple texture that has been sized to as a PNG that has a transparency on it. And essentially what it's doing is it's moving down like a flip book, this entire texture. So if we actually took a look at the sprite, and I will go and show that to you real quick. So we're going to go into the folder, take a look. This is our actual sprite sheet, just so you can see this thing. Essentially what it is a whole series of these kind of ball things that spin in a row. And we're going to look at how you can kind of build one of these in Blender and bring it into THREE.js. And this is honestly applicable to a ton of different stuff, especially web development. You can use CSS to create these things. You can do all sorts of things. We're going to be looking at THREE.js because we can use these as particles. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and jump right into Blender and take a look at how you can kind of create these things. One thing to bear in mind though, just so you can see this before I jump in, is that the size of the sheet is kind of important. When I made this one, I made it far, far too big, and so it's been resized down. I guess this is the maximum size allowed within THREE.js. When it comes to bringing in an image. So just bear that in mind when you're making these things. Don't make them quite as big as I am. So let's just jump into Blender real quick. And what we're going to do is we're going to clear out this base scene. I'm going to turn on my screencast just so you can see what keys I'm hitting. Alright, so here's our screencast. We'll go into orthogonal view. Okay. And let's go jump up. We're going to reposition the camera. So let's get this thing defaulting. Bring it out on the Y. Negative. And then reset its rotation. Alright, so now if we look through there, we should be looking through at the default scene. Let's rotate along the X 90 degrees. Alright, so now when we take a look through the camera, we're going to be looking at the very center of the scene. And one last thing we're going to do is resize this thing so it's square. Perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and add an object to the scene. We'll do this sphere is nice, so we'll do another sphere. Just doing a simple UV sphere. And we will smooth shade it. And actually before that, let's go ahead. Try this again. I'm going to add a sphere, but this time I'm going to add a few more faces to it. Just so it looks a little nicer when I smooth shade it. Alright, now if we look through, that looks nice. Now if we smooth shade it, it looks nice. Okay, excellent. Okay, so let's edit this sphere. We're going to switch over to the cycles render up top. And let's make this sphere more awesome. We'll do the edge ring select. Alright, so we have all that selected. And what we will do is we will let's extrude, and we'll scale it inwards. Okay, so that gives us a nice extrusion right there. And then we'll do the same thing on another portion. Actually, before we do that, let's assign a material to it. Shift-I, select inverse. New material. That material will be a velvet. Let's preview. Green. And we can turn on texture mode just so we can see everything. Okay, that looks nice. If you want to see it with rendered. And we can go ahead and turn on our sphere, we can turn on smooth shading. Alright, that doesn't look bad at all. We're going to need to eventually do our UV mappings on this to get this thing tightened up a little bit, but it's fine for our purposes. Select inverse, and we'll assign a new material to it. And we will make this a glossy. Okay. And we'll assign that. It's good. And let's do another ring. I'll do a fat ring right here. Okay. Edge rings. And we'll assign that material right there. In fact, we can scale this one out a little bit. So extrude, scale. Kind of looks cool. So now if we look at that, let's go ahead and render that out real quick. Well, it's something. Okay, let's use node right here under the world settings, and we're going to go in and I'm going to switch over to node mode. And we're going to add under the world, we're going to change the background. We're going to add an image to it, environment texture. And let's go ahead and connect that node right there. And let's add a little bit of an environment texture to it. So we'll go into our textures folder. And let's do that one. Alright, now if we render it out. That's looking pretty cool. Okay. Next thing you're going to need to do is we're probably going to need to switch over to our square samples so we get something nicer. And then the last thing we're going to need to do, if we're happy with this, is we are going to come down under, if I remember where this is, this one, film, enable transparent. This might take a little bit of time to render, but let's take a look anyways. Okay, that's pretty cool. Okay, we don't need this because this is a sprite to be as big as it is. Let's reduce it down to a quarter of this size, which would put it at 2, and let's make it a power of 2 actually, and bring the camera in slightly. So let's do a whole bunch of stuff. So we'll grab the camera on Y and bring it in so it fills up the whole thing. And then we are also going to reduce the amount of frames. We're just going to animate this down to 30. And then we will bring this down to 256 by 256. Alright, now if we render that, that should render fairly quickly. Let's take a look. Yeah, that looks good. I think that'll be good for our purposes. So we're only going to render a few of these frames. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin that process. So let's animate this real quick. So we're going to come back over, make sure you're in object mode, select your sphere. And we'll come back over. merge this window. And then we are going to rotate along the x-axis. We're going to start our initial position, so let's hit I, and we're going to do rotation. And then rotate along the x-axis. We're going to move over. Let's set that back to 0, make sure we don't change that. We'll move over to 15. And we're going to set that to a rotation of 180 degrees. Okay, and then we are going to go to 30, the end. And we're going to set that one to a rotation of 360. Okay, so now if we go into camera mode and play our animation. Alright, that's pretty cool. Alright, very quick, dirty. Have it there. Okay, so let's render this out. Set up your output folder. I'm going to put mine in the render. I have a renders folder right here. And this is where we're going to export all of our PNG files, so we'll accept that. And now let's go ahead and render that out. Oop, animation. So we'll give that a few seconds to render out. Alright, so while that's rendering, just so you can see, we're going to need to get a file. So we're going to be using GIMP to put this together. So what you're going to need to do actually is get a plugin for GIMP. Okay, and you can get that from the GIMP plugin registry, and it's called Sprite Sheet Animation Tiles. And what this is basically going to do is it's going to take all of those files that we've just created, and it's going to basically combine them into one file really quickly, pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and make sure you download this, and then you're going to be sticking that in your GIMP 2.0 scripts folder. You'll see a whole bunch of other scripts in there, and you'll just be adding the Sprite Sheet SCM file to that. Then once you have that, then you can call it fairly easily. So that should be about done rendering. Yep. Okay, so we have that. Let's go ahead and open this up in GIMP. All right, here's our GIMP file. And we are going to open as layers and go to the folder you saved that in. In my case, it happens to be Documents, Blender folder. And then render, I will select all these 30 files and open that up. Doop, doop, doop. Perfect. Okay. And then the last thing you're going to do is come up under Filters and go to Sprite Sheet, Create from Layers. And that's going to create one big long file. So, and just remember, make sure you stay within what I mentioned earlier, that size. I believe it was like 16384 or something along that lines. I'm within it this time around, so this should be okay. I'm going to go ahead and save that file. We can do save a copy and make sure that you keep it as a PNG file. That'll maintain the... Oh, nope. Sorry, we'll do export as a PNG. Make sure you keep that transparency. We're going to bring that over to our WebGL folder. And I'll just overwrite this Sprite file right here. Yep. Okay. Alright, so we did 30 images in it, with our first image starting at 1 and the last image ending at 31. Okay, so bear that in mind when we're doing our math in order to bring this file in. So let's go ahead and we can close this stuff up. Go ahead and open up brackets. All right, and let's take a look at how this is going to work. Okay. All right, so this is again our default setup. You know, nothing's changed since we did it. What we're going to need to do now is we're going to load our file in. So we're just going to use our image utils function to load that said texture into it. And then what we're going to do is we have, if you remember, we have a new value of 1 that I'm setting right there. And I'm going to switch this to 31, okay? So that means that our first image is positioned at 1, and our last is at 31, and we're going to be doing fractions of said PNG, and it's going to be calculating everything for us. So what we're going to basically do is clamp this down. Now we have this texture wrap s wrap t 3.repeat wrapping. Okay, this has to do with textures with power of 2, and it has to do with the way that it handles positioning them. I'm just putting this in here. You don't really need it in here for this this to work, but you'll see that this is commonly used in some of the other projects on there. So just want you to be aware. What it's going to do is actually just clamp it to the left hand side because it needs to be a power of 2 in order for this to work. Okay. Alright, so what we're going to do now is create a new sprite material. This is our object now, and what we're going to do is our material is going to be a fraction of this texture that we placed up here. It's going to be 1/31st of that entire map right there. So that's all we're going to be demoing. We'll set the scale on it. Okay, and I can bring this down now because I was using something much bigger prior. And we're going to create the new sprite, and we're going to basically add said sprite to the scene. And then our function is going to be really, really easy this time around. Oops, close that up. Okay, so if it equals 31, the new value is now 1, okay? And our offset is basically going to be moving the texture using the offset command down the line. Okay, so this is pretty much our hello world. I didn't want this thing to be super complicated because I just wanted you guys to get the concept behind of how you can animate these textures and move them down on sprites. If you'll see, they have other people have worked with sprites, and they do a lot more complicated stuff in it. I just wanted to show you this workflow and how you can move it down. If we go ahead and hit save on this, and then come back over to our scene, hit refresh. Ooh, and I have a small issue. Okay, so what's going on here is that something is off right here. Let's see if I change this right here to 30. Alright, so what you're looking at right there is a screw up on my part because basically did not get the the quantity of frames correct. So now if we refresh this, it should be, there we go. Okay, that's going aggressively fast. Of course, we can add more frames onto it. There's other ways we can slow this thing down. For example, if we wanted to, we could increase the, let's change that. There we go, that looks a lot better. Okay, so we can, other ways we can increase the, we can slow this down a variety of different ways. The other thing is, noticed I had to reset that. If it's going wacky woo like that, it means that you might not have your amount of tiles correctly set on this. Let's go ahead and see if we can reduce the speed of this thing as well. Alright, so let's create a quick function that's going to check the frame rate. I'll show you how to go and do that. First, we're going to create a variable that's going to be frame rate. We'll set that equal to 30 frames a second. And we'll set a present time variable. So we'll do current time. I'm going to set this equal to the current date. And this is going to be expressed in milliseconds from 1970, January 1st. So it's just one big long number. And then we are going to do the interval. As expressed in milliseconds divided by the frame rate. Okay, and then in our render function, what we're going to want to do is basically check the modulus of 30, which is our frame rate. And basically, whenever that's 0, it's going to call this function. So basically, 30. So 1,000 is 1 second essentially, and so we're calling 30 frames a second. So we have to just do that quick calculation. So what we'll do is our current time, as expressed as date now. So what this is going to do is give us the current time from 1970, and then the change from the last time, which will be current time subtracted by old time. So this is going to update that value and give you the delta of it. Okay, and then we'll just do a quick if statement. Okay, so if that delta is greater than the interval, then this is what's going to happen. The first thing we're going to do, then, so old time is now equal to current time minus delta interval. That. All right, so what's happening there is essentially it's giving us our modulus. Every 30 frames, it's going to update that value. Okay, so basically the module says that if the remainder is exactly 30, then you're going to call this function. Okay, let's take a look and see if that works. Well, I feel like I'm missing something. Oh, I didn't call it delta, that's why. Alright, let's set a delta. Alright, let's give this a go and see if that fixes things. Alright, so that's our old one. Alright, you can see that's moving much slower. Why don't we also, while we're at it, go ahead and increase the scale of that, because we can make it a little bit bigger. So let's see, where am I? We can actually make that 5 by 5 by 5. Refresh. Alright, that is awesome. Okay. And that's going to just keep going just like that. As you can see, you can kind of do all sorts of crazy things with these. But this is just kind of to get you guys' mind going as to what direction you can do. Obviously, this is kind of a very powerful tool for changing things around. Thanks again for watching my video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. And tune in as we go through more stuff with sprites in the future. Thanks again.